if our audience only knew how difficult it is for the two of us to sit so quietly.
Right, right. Well, we're almost right at the top of the hour, so it'll be time in no time. And here we
And
go.
here
Go
we
ahead,
are,
Marisa.
and here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Management Q's webinar series on the art of effective management. I'm Marisa Stoltzfus, your HROD executive expert, bringing you more than 25 years of experience, and I have the privilege of hosting this webinar series. Today's session will provide a snapshot into the HR process of performance management and a look into the neuroscience connection. This is going to be an exciting 30 minutes. Whether you're leading a small team or an entire organization, performance management is an absolute critical process and one of the most challenging to manage effectively. This series is designed to share bits of knowledge, some tips, and a few tools that will help you navigate the complexities of management so that you can enhance your team's performance and drive organizational success. The Art of Effective Management series allows you to explore management concepts, a few communication strategies, and some decision-making points to inspire you and help you nurture a positive workplace culture. For today, we'll explore the neurological connections to performance management and a few neuroscientific principles. We value your insight and questions, so feel free to participate actively in the chat box. Now, here's Dr. Myra Austin, CEO and founder of Management Q's, to walk us through today's management topic. Dr. Myra?
Thank you, Marisa. Fantastic as always. So let's start with some compliance, as is good practice for managers. This Management Q's webinar is a series that's intended for informational purposes only. And what we mean by that is that it should not be relied upon in making a conclusion in a specific area of law. So if you come across an area that we're discussing throughout the series that you feel is relevant to what's going on in your environment, please make sure to escalate that to your HR leader or to legal counsel as necessary. We will be sharing instances, experience, case studies, and valid information to get started in your discovery process, but by no means take it as specific legal guidance. Okay, well, with that said, let's go ahead and take this a step further. So I'm Dr. Myra Austin. I have over 2 decades of experience in management and operations. I am a management enthusiast, and so a champion for all of you managers out there. I know what you do. I know how hard you work. And so my experience really comes in connecting the dots for you in an operational setting. Marisa has over 2 decades of experience as an HR executive, in addition to organizational development. So make sure to make best use of her time and ask any related questions as we go through our series today. Okay, let's go ahead and dive in. So for today, we will do an overview of performance management. We have an amazing guest today, a panelist who you will be meeting today, as we break down performance management and add some depth to what it means from a management standpoint to really understand what happens when people go through and experience performance management. We'll go through some takeaways. We'll do some resource overview. We'll open it up to Q&A, and then we'll hand it back to Marisa for closing remarks. Okay? All right, let's get into it. Okay, so getting to know performance management. We've all heard it. If you're a manager on this call, if you're a team member on this call, if you're an executive on this call, you've all heard the phrase performance management. What I think makes it unique when we're looking at how to be effective, which is really what this webinar series is about, is understanding that performance management is a strategic process. And so when you're looking at strategy, it has to be timely, it has to be executed well, and it has to be understood. And so that's part of the complexity behind performance management. It starts with setting clear expectations, providing ongoing feedback, which I'll pause there and I'll say this. The ongoing feedback part is where leaders and managers typically fall short because it requires continuity of thought. It also requires an understanding of the bigger picture as you're going through the day-to-day. So that means that if you're being effective, you're remaining anchored, and that can be extremely difficult for anybody. The third part is identifying development opportunities with team members. So that can sometimes to managers and leaders, high level leaders, feel like it's a draining task because it requires focus from everybody involved, and it requires a certain type of empathy that can be very difficult to come by in the workforce. Before I move on, Marisa, do you have anything to add from the HR lens on these three areas?
Very, very key. Performance management is every week, almost every day. It is not a once and done at the end of the year process. This is something that you need to be thinking about and focused on throughout the year.
Yeah, so I'll say the hardest part of being effective is that you have to build habits around it, much like clean eating, much like anything else that looks great, but nobody knows how much it took to get there. Mastery is like that. And so when it comes to performance management, it's how you embed it in your day to day. Okay, that's what makes a manager effective. So the staffing function. So through this webinar series, we talked about each function that made up effective management. Staffing was one of those functions. And if you guys were on the sessions and remember, it's one of my favorite because it's so often missed, right? So performance falls under this staffing function of management. And so performance then pertains to the manager's role in specific areas of performance. And those areas are recruitment, selection, training, development, appraisal, and promotion of personnel. So that's all encompassing and all part of performance management in the workforce. And so the responsibility for the efficient planning and execution of this staffing function, it rests upon a manager, but not just one manager. It rests upon all managers in an environment. And so that's another gold nugget there that's often missed. Sometimes what I see going into the workforce is this responsibility is placed on the HR managers. And so it's inappropriately placed on them if managers are waiting for an HR hero to come and save them. It really is an effective manager's role to execute in these areas. So the staffing function also includes areas like progressive discipline and retention and incentivization. All of those things touch and interact with performance management. As an HR leader, Marisa, this is really kind of hits you right spot in the middle, right? What has been your experience in these areas with relating to managers in the workforce?
Yeah, this is a big part of what HR gets involved with. And for the HRGs that are out there, the HR managers, you know that your leaders will come to you and say, hey, I have a problem. Can you help me fix it? Well, we can guide, we can facilitate, we can coach, we can support, but the ultimate responsibility of addressing performance management really lies with the managers. You are there for the day to day. You are there to see what works, what doesn't work. And so from an HR perspective, this is along with communication, and communication is a big part of this. This is the lifeline process in an organization.
Yeah, agreed. It builds continuity. So, as we go through this session today, think about what builds continuity from a performance management standpoint in the areas that you're currently involved in. Because as a manager, that's what you want to think about is, am I creating continuity? Is there enough of performance management embedded in what I'm doing? So to me, it's important to understand the why of things. And so as managers, it should be important to identify why you're doing something, what the purpose and objective of it is. That helps you buy into why it's important for you to do it and prioritize it accordingly. So the goal of performance management is this: it's to set expectations. It's to help employees develop skills and competencies. It's to obtain continuous real-time feedback. This is how you understand what's happening in the organization and how you can troubleshoot or streamline any bottlenecks that take place in your work environment. This is how you effectively manage through those things. Help meet organizational goals. So that means linking it up with the design and the direction that executive leadership is moving towards. And as managers, if you want to be effective, you always have to connect those dots. It means understanding where the team stands in relation to a successful execution. A successful execution of a project, a task, or a department goal doesn't happen if you don't know what's happening with your team, right? That's how managers get blindsided. And so I think that it's a really important part of buying in to understand what the goal of performance management is. And the goal of it is not to have an annual review. That is not the goal. Okay.
This is a great slide, Dr. Myra. I love that one. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So performance management cycle. So here's the other piece that I think is often missing in the understanding of management and their role in performance management. So there is a cycle, folks, that we're supposed to follow. So this is a great test, litmus test for you right now, right? Which of these are you not doing? Or are you following a cycle? Those are the kinds of questions you want to ask yourselves in this moment. And the cycle is this: you have to plan for performance management. You have to monitor as part of performance management. Then you have to review at the outcomes that are coming out of what's happening in your environment. And then you have to reward. There is no point in having people go through a cycle that doesn't culminate in something. That is the definition of losing people, right?
Mm.
And so if you're having retention issues, if you're having performance issues, you might want to start with checking one of these boxes and seeing where you're falling short, because chances are one of these or two of these are missing. Most companies, I'll say this, have one and two checked, but not all four. And I can speak to real case studies. In the past, I've worked for environments that had the planning down. They had all of the tools. They had the performance reviews. They had individual performance plans, but they weren't rewarding. They weren't comfortable with giving incentives. They weren't comfortable with giving increases in salary. So when that happens, you've created a bottleneck, and everything you've done leading up to that point ends up falling short. And that's the
Yeah,
understanding that needs to be kind of translated over. Oftentimes, Marisa, you're involved in these conversations when this
most
goes wrong.
definitely. Yeah,
What are some
yeah.
examples of what you've seen?
So, over and above this cycle, Dr. Myra, what we're missing is just a level of appreciation and recognition,
Yeah.
right? So sometimes people just, everywhere I've gone, people want to feel valued for the contribution that they bring. So, if I'm contributing at 110%, at the very least, give me a pat on the back, right? But because I've planned, because I'm monitoring, because I'm reviewing, the rewarding piece, sometimes you can do it, sometimes you can't. Sometimes it just has to look different
Yeah.
than a dollar value. So, that's the recognition piece, the appreciation piece, the shout outs. Those are really important as well in this whole cycle.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing I'll say this is I've been in difficult environments where executive leadership may not understand the disposition of the manager. So I'm going to quickly answer that question. How you navigate or mitigate those types of moments is by providing two or three creative ways that are in line with the available budget. That's how you create your competitive advantage as a manager, not just giving up, right? And the other thing too that does is it shows your team that you care. It shows your team that you know what's going on in the environment. And so you create this degree of confidence and trust that your team has in you because you stepped into it as a leader. And that's where a manager then in turn becomes a leader, right? In that right moment. If your executive team has no budget, make a convicting plea for change, and if or gather with your managers and together approach the issue for a better solution, because ultimately it's going to impact the environment anyway. And then lastly, you want to consider if that's where you want to be, right? Because you're part of the bunch, and that's just part of navigating your management career. If you're looking to be an effective manager, right? You don't want to be an effective manager in an ineffective environment, right? That's not going to promote your individual success. Okay, timing is everything. So timing dictates success. I think that's something that's embedded in my being, being an operations leader. But from a performance management perspective, every day it should be an objective for the manager to think of performance management. So as you're coming in, as you're getting your cup of coffee, I'm a coffee lover, right? Um, take 3 minutes, take 2 minutes, and make that a discipline. What am I doing with regard to performance management today? It doesn't have to be complicated, and it doesn't have to be a lengthy process, but it does have to be top of mind. So performance management strategies should be embedded in your daily interactions with team members. It could be that check-in, that could be part of your performance management. It could be your weekly one-on-one meeting, that could be part of it. Performance management for the year or quarter should lead to a formal review process. So these touch points should lead to the final point, right? So think of it as steps that you're creating for the employee. The team member should never be surprised. That's part of the challenge with the resentment that people feel around performance reviews or being performance managed. And most of the time it's because it hasn't been done well. Okay, so performance reviews. So we talked about the culmination in performance reviews. So we're going to touch on that. Performance reviews can be very effective when they're executed correctly with the team member in mind. Okay, so you want to not execute that with the thought of, I just need to get this done, because that's the first barrier to success, is thinking that way as a manager. You should be thinking, how can I help this person be better? How can I help my department grow? Those are the types of thoughts that should be in your mind as you're going through this process. Managers should use performance reviews to be transparent and to provide feedback. So this is your platform to have that conversation of the good and the bad, and how can we look towards the future. That's how performance reviews should be conducted. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Psychological studies and research suggest that regular, fair, and diverse feedback can lead to substantial improvements in team performance. Again, we're not robots. We have things, right, that work different with us, that we get triggered by, that we respond to in different ways. And so the manager's connection to the outcomes of what the employees are doing is connected in more ways than one. So workplace research points to meaningful feedback, improving employee engagement and lowering talent attrition. Right? Did you have something to add to that piece, Marisa?
Absolutely. I mean, that transparent level of insight and information, and the genuine desire to help your team be better, because it's your team. I mean, that's really what we're all about when we talk about performance management. And I'm absolutely passionate about this particular topic, because when we have these types of open conversations, work becomes fun.
Yeah, then you actually start to enjoy it. Then you can start to achieve, right? Then you can move past whatever's holding you back when it's done right. So to really capture the benefits of performance reviews, it has to be conducted in a cadence. It can't be a surprise. It can't be something that everybody dreads. It has to be handled masterfully with a clear outcome. And it has to include balance, good and bad, right? When you're going to help somebody grow, it's not just cheerleading them. That could be toxic too if it's not done right. It's really showing people where the opportunity is and caring about it. And ultimately, as a manager, when you care about it, that directly impacts your success. So it's tying those things together. Okay, let's keep going here. Okay, so the biggest mistake. So these are the biggest mistakes that happen in performance management. Not making sure the team members understand the big picture, not getting team members. Yeah, did you have something there?
We don't have the next slide.
Oh, the next slide. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Here we go.
There
Thank you for catching that. Not getting team member buy-in, not having regular check-ins, not having two-way conversations about performance, not having key performance indicators defined or aligned with organizational objectives. And I'll say this with that part, if the company has KPIs, but nobody understands them, they're worthless.
Yeah.
Okay. They're just for show. So as managers, if you see that your team is struggling with understanding KPIs, or you yourself struggle with how that links to your department, that's where you want to sit down and have a brainstorm session. There's nothing worse than empty data points that nobody understands and knows what to do with, right? Not setting clear goals, not aligning expectation with core values. So companies, once they get to a certain size, should have core values that they're aligning their goals with, right? Because it's what you stand for, it's what you work towards, and ultimately it's in line with the organizational direction. Not addressing underperformance, managers who avoid or just don't measure, don't manage, aren't involved. And so underperformance is born from that. You're creating an opportunity for that to sit there and rise. Not recognizing, celebrating, or rewarding good performance. Again, just like previously mentioned, if you're doing everything else but that part, it's still going to fail. So it's understanding that there has to be follow through A through Z, not making the path to success easy to understand. So if things are very complicated, if you're using a performance management tool that is difficult, you've lost the purpose of that tool and you're not going to get the outcome that you want. It's just wasted time and energy, right? Simple is better if it gets people to understand the objective and gets them to the outcome. Okay. Not focusing on performance improvement, but instead focusing on checking the box. Again, you'll hear this in other series, but I'll say getting the job done is not the same as getting the job done right. So the focus should never be to just get something done. Did you have something to add to that, Marisa?
No, you make me smile, Dr. Myra.
Oh, I'm glad I could do that for you. Not creating autonomy in the performance management experience. This has to be a partnership with our team members. We can't be on top of them, micromanaging them. If that's your idea of management, there's some mind shifts that need to happen. Management is setting controls in place, as we've learned in the past, not controlling people. That is not what effective management is. Okay. All right, so beyond performance management. So we're getting to the very exciting part of our segment today, which is looking deeper. And our panelist is definitely going to have some thoughts to share on this part. But beyond performance management, managers should consider this. How managers handle performance management has lasting effects on team members. You can change somebody's life for the good or for the bad. You could scar them permanently. So it's important to give some thought to these areas. From a neuroscience perspective, feedback is best received when people are using their rational brain, their prefrontal cortex, okay? And we'll talk a little bit of some of these areas, but when team members use their limbic systems to respond, it triggers emotions. So when you don't time things appropriately, when you don't space things out, when people get shocked or offended or surprised, it changes the way that they're going to respond. And it's something that goes beyond what we see superficially. So as managers, I think that this is where we take a little bit more responsibility in how we performance manage. When we encourage team members through reinforcement and recognition, we create neural pathways in relation to performance. So I'm going to encourage the managers watching this to think to themselves, I'm creating neural pathways, and I'm sure our guest Sully is going to love this. But think about what that means to you when you think of performance management moving forward, because you're creating a lot more than the culmination of a project or the completion of a task. You're having a much higher impact than you might realize. Managers must look deeper than outcomes and focus on experience to realize, to really maximize an employee's productivity. At the end of the day, the connections go way deeper. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and invite our guests. So let me grab you, Sully, from our audience here. Give me a second to go ahead and invite you over and give you an opportunity to speak. And while we get you here, I will go ahead and introduce you. So I'll have Sully introduce himself as well, but he's been partnering with Management Cues to take management training to a deeper level. So he is doing data collection and other things that really speak to the experiences that link to the managers in our training from a performance management standpoint. So I thought that he would be a phenomenal guest for you all to hear from today. Could you get video enabled? Yeah, let me see if I could do that on my end. Let me see here. Thank you for pointing that out. Let's see. I don't see it on here. Would you mind speaking up, Sully? Let me make you a co-host. Okay, now you should be able to. Oh, you're welcome, Anja. Thank you. Anja said, thank you very much for your profound, passionate, and informative session. You're welcome. Sully, are we able to get you on camera?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect.
There you are. Welcome. Go ahead, introduce yourself and share a little bit about yourself before we move on to your panelist questions.
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Soulaimane, but I just go by Suli. I obtained my bachelor's from UCLA in neuroscience and bioengineering, and I'm currently completing my master's in neuroengineering, really trying to bring neuroscience out of the lab and have a real-world impact with everything that's possible today with neuroscience. So currently building a company called Neuron, and we're working with management Qs to really help neuroscience optimize workforce and management development.
Yeah, and he's done a
Nice.
phenomenal job with his team. So we've learned quite a bit. And so I'm going to start with the first question. And the first question we had for Sully is, how does an understanding of neuroscience contribute to effective performance management strategies and the cognitive process?
Yeah. So in workplace problems, when you dig deep to find out the source of the problem, it always goes back to the human component. Um, and human was the priority. So neuroscience allows us to put humans at the center of the workplace and the work culture. Um, Neuroscience actually quantifies directly through brain activity cognitive processes. These include stress, focus, mental effort, fatigue, alertness. And these are not quantified through subjective questionnaires, they're quantified directly through brain activity. So we're actually able to see objective quantifications. And just like Dr. Myra mentioned about feedback either triggering the logical brain, which is the prefrontal cortex located in the front of your head, right behind your forehead, or the limbic system, which are actually the deep areas of the brain. And so what the neuroscience research tells us is that whenever something is not a habit, when people are not familiar with them, they actually respond aversively to them. So they have a negative emotional response. So the goal with feedback and performance management is to make it a habit, is to make it the standard of your organization. And to do that, there are multiple ways. One is really to have, as they said, a very regular checkpoint. And on top of that, instead of having just one weekly checkpoint with your entire team, it would be great to have a weekly one-on-one with each one of your team members to have an open conversation, create an environment where they feel comfortable coming to you with feedback. And on the other hand, it would be very powerful if you, as the manager, ask for feedback from them. So that, again, you really build this environment where you make feedback the norm. And so to share a direct finding that we've had through our study with management Qs, we are looking at cognitive load in relationship to management performance. Cognitive load can also be thought of as mental effort. And so we saw that mental effort decreases as it should after managers go through a training. However, when these managers do not retain the information, do not incorporate the learnings into their everyday work, they actually have higher mental effort when they approach these new tasks. So the goal after you provide this feedback in, let's say, a weekly one-on-one, the goal is to make sure that they incorporate the feedback into their everyday work.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So what's really great about this, and I know we're going to go a little bit over, so please stay on if you can. If not, we'll send you the recording. So in our training methodology, we incorporate these things that stimulate the mind positively, and we do it intentionally. And so what Sully and his team are doing is they're quantifying it objectively and proving that we are doing it in the right way, right? So not only are we training the managers, we're managing them and communicating with them with an approach that has the right type of result. And so that's really significant. So the second question for you, Sully, is what neuroscientific principles can leaders leverage to enhance employee motivation and engagement in the workforce?
So the first one would be that weekly one-on-one that we mentioned. Now, to get even more granular, there's neuroscience research, again, by recording the brain's activity non-invasively, that showed that back-to-back meetings have a significant negative effect on stress and attention. And so here, more granularly, something you can implement for you and your team is to make sure that you incorporate as little as a 5-minute break between these back-to-back meetings, which are almost the norm today in our remote environments.
Right.
And the goal in those 5 minutes is to really leave the office space, leave the desk, just let your mind wander, to allow your brain to reset and set your stress baseline, your attention baseline back to zero before going to the next meeting more energized and productive. And then the second, even more granular tool that you can incorporate today and that you can tell your team members about is something called the physiological side. So related to meetings, there's a lot of stress in everyday workplace culture. And one very valuable tool is a physiological sigh, which is a breathing technique. It is consisting of 2 inhales, a big one first, followed by a short one, and then a big exhale. And it simply looks like this. And so the double inhale allows to really open up the alveoli in your lungs. And it actually has been proven to have the same effect as some actual anti-anxiety drugs. So that's a great tool to use in your everyday life. Right before going into an important meeting, you can do this physiological sigh just one time, but if it's best for you, up to 3 times, and that will literally reduce your stress before going into an important event.
Wow, what a simple but beautiful thing he just gave us, managers. You know that this is a thing, right? Think about what it would look like and what it would feel like if we had this exercise take place before we walked into every meeting and we made that part of our cultural day-to-day practice. And this is the kind of stuff that really is game-changing in management, and something that maybe we have not considered in the past is that we have a lasting impact. Thank you, Sully, for such great information. It's a pleasure to partner with you. And I can't just wait to continue learning from you and all of these great things that we can apply into design. And so for the managers, if you guys have any more questions for Sully, you can email us. I'll forward them on to him as well. We will be having this session on our new YouTube channel. So if you haven't checked that out, check it out. It will be on there. And we will continue to share. It looks like we have some chat here. Okay. Okay. Thank you. So it's from Sully. If you would like to Google it, learn how to do the physiological side. Did I say that right? Okay, great. Okay,
Yeah,
all right,
absolutely.
okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for being on the panel today. I'll go ahead and take us right into key takeaways. Okay, so these are our key takeaways for today. And let me go. Yep, got it. I got it. Yep. Okay, performance management is a strategic process. Performance management is part of the staffing function in management. There are goals to performance management. The performance management cycle includes planning, monitoring, reviewing, and rewarding. So it's a full cycle. Performance reviews are a great performance management tool if executed correctly. And there is a link between performance management and neuroscience, which I think is one of the biggest takeaways from today's session. Just listening to Sully, my mind goes a million different directions into how we can incorporate design, a more significant design in how we manage. Okay, I'll go ahead and pass it to you, Marisa, if you want to add any closing thoughts. But it's been a pleasure today. Thank you, Sully.
Absolutely. So if anybody wants to add to the chat before we close, we'll follow up with you. But as we conclude today's session, I encourage you to take these insights and apply them The recording of this webinar, as Dr. Myra said, and the deck will be emailed to all of our participants. You can find additional resources, including planners and other tools to support your development at www.managementcues.org. We'll air our last Art of Effective Management webinar next Wednesday, March 27th at 10 a.m. Pacific. Yet another special guest on the topic of communication mastery. So we're really looking forward to that. You won't want to miss it. Connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn to stay updated on future events, and now YouTube. And submit questions and share your feedback. Thank you. Thank you for being part of the Art of Effective Management series. We'll look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye.